evening. The news gang is here. The dams, the scums, the hyenas, and the thieves. And it's only just beginning. Turbulence in the air. Will that merger at the airport be cleared for takeoff? Also tonight, the shake-up blamed on the handshake. The first anniversary is here. We'll look at what the verdict is. But let's begin with the rising tide over the now very well-known dams that have not even been built. The Deputy President and the ODM leader have once again found a reason to fight very hard, in spite of both claiming intimate friendship with the President, who is himself driving the anti-graft crusade. Who is fooling who? Here are some of the latest statements that have heated up the political landscape.
Niliona mwingine akisema sijui nimeiba mali ya nani. Mimi namwambia, wewe tembea hapa Karura Forest hapa. Ofisi ziko hapo. Kwenda useme Uhuru kile ameiba, shida iko wapi jameni? What is the problem? Lakini hii mambo ya kutishatisha watu ati kwa sababu umetaja kitu kwa mazishi, huyo mtu ambaye amekufa hata kusaidia.
And as the president said yesterday, if you have got evidence against him, take it. Bring me any evidence against the president, I will take it myself. If you fear to go to see Mr.
Sasa mkubwa, hii evidence utapeleka Karura ama pale EACC? Unasema hapana. Mimi nilipigiwa, najua nyinyi ni wezi kwa sababu nilipigiwa simu na Baba Mtakatifu.
All right, thieves, Karura, Pope, all of these things. Francis, are we still talking about dams? Am I missing something?
It started with the dams. It has now mutated to something totally different. Actually, the fight against corruption currently ought to confuse very many people because it has now taken a totally political dimension. What sounded like the vigor and the search for the lost billions is also looking like the lost cause for 2022 or thereabout. So a lot of this discussion will be about 2022 or thereof, who will be vying, who won't be vying, who will compete against who is being targeted, who is not being targeted. So in the course of it, the billions will disappear. The moment you bring in politics into the fight against corruption, the war is lost totally. And that is the situation as it is.
Linus, I can see you sitting straight. The lost billions seem to be the casualties in this very interesting contest that I, quite frankly, don't even seem to understand.
The voice that really mattered this week and will continue to matter going forward is that of the DCI, George Kinoti. The other voice that will matter will be that of Nurdin Haji, the Director of Public Prosecutions. What we are going through is not new in Kenya. Politicization of a process like this is commonplace because politics and tribe are the easiest hideouts when you have these issues such as corruption. You can very, very easily hide them either in politics or in tribe. That's why we are hearing of politicization in terms of 2022. We are also hearing of selective prosecution in terms of trying to ethnically profile the number and names and surnames of the people who are facing these charges. And Joe, this is historical because you will remember way back when William Timama, the late MP for Narok North, faced charges in the High Court here in Nairobi. What did he do? He flooded the court with his supporters. When Anne Waiguru was summoned to the EACC, she went there with a crowd. What did Evans Kidero do when he was summoned to the same place? He went there with a crowd. But there's something that is consistent about these stories. Politics can only last so long. They can only go so far. Look at the newspapers these days and even our own bulletins. You see Evans Kidero cutting a lonely image, sitting in court. That is what it eventually comes down to, which is why, for those who really want to know how things will play out, is listen to what Kinoti is doing and what DPP are doing.
But
what will they end up with? Will they take people to court? That is what will matter.
But is it coincidence, quite frankly, that this is turning out the way it is? It does appear to me that for politicians, buying even one day where the politics clouds the real conversation is just good enough, Yvonne.
It is, and it's smoke and mirrors. And even as we're talking about the politics and who's saying what and who's saying, you know, thief, thief, look over there, and who is the king of impunity, let's also not get lost in all of these issues. The dam scandal is a big one, and it broke just about the same time when the newspapers broke the story of what's happening with Galana Kulalu. And these are some of the things that I think Kenyans are focusing on every day. Listen, the average Kenyan is spending 70% of their income on food. And then you hear that Galana, you know, has also gone through a similar scandal like this one. In fact, you can directly link it to the clamor for high salaries. Everyone is asking for more money, right? And that is because of the high cost of living, the high cost of food. Galana was a well-meaning project. It was because, in fact, half of the maize farmers are themselves net buyers. We are a net importation country. Here are some figures. Our wheat consumption, we import 75% of the wheat that we use. We import 75% of the rice that we use. We import 45 to 50% of the sugar that we use in this country. We are spending 200 billion shillings on basic food imports. These are the issues at heart. Now, you have Galana Kulalu and you have the dam scandal, both of which would have been able to help alleviate the lives of people. But yet now, who's the king of impunity? Who's a bigger thief? Who's calling this? Who's saying it's 7 and not 21? Only 7. There's a guarantee
unfortunately,
on that amount of money. And for me, it also, just to finish the point, it then goes to the president's Big Four agenda. Food security was one of those, which, by the way, you've noticed, we've not heard too much about because we're focusing on housing and manufacturing and the others. This is what is at the heart of the war against corruption.
Joe, something... Jamila, you have even more figures. You have even more figures. Many more dams that we should be talking about, but we are not.
Dams. In fact, since 2013, various government agencies have signed or are planning to enter into contracts worth over 700 billion for construction of dams. Okay, and in fact, Water CS Simon Chelugui said that his ministry itself is planning to construct 57 dams countrywide. Different parts of the country. Some of them are what they call multi-year projects, and it'll take a lot of time from conception to construction. And he says a lot of these dams are the feasibility studies stage. But now, he went before the National Assembly Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. And the committee stopped the projects that were worth 188 billion. That was for 24 dams across the country because they wanted due diligence to be done. And they were asking questions about, there's something that is called the engineering, procurement, construction and financing model that is being used in financing these projects, whereby that company that will be given, it will do everything. It will be the engineering, the procurement. You have to give them money before even the project has even started being done. And something Lina spoke about that reminds me of an incident a few years back, mtu wetu syndrome. A leader was taken to the EACC. And there's a huge crowd of people out there. And you know, usually we don't concentrate on them much. We take the cutaways and it will fit somewhere in our story. But then we asked one lady, he said, unafanya nini hapa? Oh, nimekuja kutetea kiongozi. Kiongozi yupi? She had no idea. And
so they were hired?
They were hired. She said she was given 500 shillings to appear there, to come and say mtu wangu, mtu wangu. And this thing about mtu wangu takes me to a sound bite. Robert, if you can hear me, there are 2 sound bites I want you to play. One by one, two legislators, Kutunya and Keter, who talk about tribe and stealing. We'd like to hear that.
Our position is very clear. Let DCI continue doing their role and obligation as per the Constitution.
We are challenging the institutions concerned that this investigation should not take long. It will be concluded very soon. We want to know these carpets. What is the role of carpets in a construction site?
That was, I think, 2 days ago in Parliament, and this issue of tribe, and it even came up when the DPP started arresting watu kamata weekend, and we had people saying that watu wanashuka wanatoka eneo moja. And in fact, with this dam scandal, imesemekana kwamba hizi dams moja ziko katika eneo moja ya taifa hili, and there are dams all across the country. So Watu wanalengwa upande mmoja.
But there was also Oscar Sudi,
Yes.
who targeted the president, because earlier we
tweet,
saw
yes.
when we were starting, the president actually was speaking and saying, "Kama uko na evidence,
Nenda
peleka
Karura.
huko
Kwa
and
DCI,
all
yes.
that."
Nenda
I think
Karura.
we have that bite.
Let's listen
Yes.
to Oscar
Yeah.
Sudi,
Right.
and then we bring in the president.
Robert, we can listen to Oscar Sudi.
Uko na mpango kama hutaki kwenda nyumbani, Mr. President. Tell us. Maneno ya kukoroga maneno huko kando, mnasunguka sijui huyu, handshake sijui ile, sijui tunataka tushike huyu, sijui tunataka tufuguse huyu, kwa sababu mnatafuta William Ruto. Mimi nataka niwaambie kinagaubaga ya kwamba Wakenya sio wajinga, na sisi kama viongozi wa Bondo la Ufa tumechoka.
Interesting, Francis, that we see Oscar Sudi, who is actually seen as an ally of the deputy president, one of his fiercest supporters now, is speaking like that about the president. We've seen the deputy president himself very angry, targeting his salvos at the former prime minister. Never mind that, even though the former prime minister is speaking about this, but this whole issue actually started with the DCI, and the president has been urging him on, say, yeah, you go ahead and do this thing. We really need to get to the bottom of this corruption issue. What's really going on here? What has the president got to do with this? Why is Oscar Sudi talking like that?
Distinguish two things. One, you see, when the president and the deputy president were at the judiciary function last week, the president said the DCI is doing a very good job. On the other hand, the deputy president was saying we need to guard against politicization and, weaponization of the fight against corruption. In so many words, you're saying, looks like this fight against corruption is directed at me. His supporters have not wasted any opportunity to say this fight against corruption is directed at the deputy president with the intention of blocking him from vying for the 2022 race, or in any way try to smear him with the corruption mud and tag so that he becomes unelectable in 2022. That's the narrative. Those are the politics. And so when Oscar Sudi, one of the allies to the deputy president, says some of these things and actually gets bold enough to say, the president, tell us whether you don't want to leave, whether you want to kick out the deputy president, whether you want to block him from vying, you can see where all this is directed at. Initially, it was chini ya maji, so to say, but now it's out there. Of course, there are some things that the deputy president will not say about his boss, and that is the president. But when they are said by his allies, it doesn't require a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge to know where that is directed at. Some narrative will tell you that in the villages, if I quarrel with you, Joe, and I may not be able to take you on, I may ask my sons to go and throw stones kwa roof yako just to ndio ujue tuko hii town. But basically
in my village, actually, they say if someone who's stronger than you steps on your mother's smoking pipe,
yes, Kiko,
yes, that one, you actually turn to your mother and say, sasa mama, hata wewe unawekanga isiweke vitu vizuri hapa, you know.
Now, Joe, in my village, our mothers don't smoke.
There's a problem in that village. That pipe used to be, it was not just meant for
the snuff.
But I want to go to the point that Francis here is raising, where we have to really go to the genesis of this whole issue that is going on. How did the deputy president end up in the middle of the dam? I think he jumped into it, and we have the bite. On the day he went to the judiciary function, he said he was uninvited, and sort of placed himself right in the middle of it.
The 21 billion.
There is no record with the DCI, even in the stories that are said to have leaked to the media, that placed the deputy president at the scene of crime, which is the dam in Elgeyo Marakwet. He went in himself, and I think this is the bite. I think we do have the denial of the 21 billion lost. Yes, let's listen to this.
Wale wanatuambia ya kwamba tumepoteza bilioni 21 Kimwarer na Aro. Watuambie hiyo taarifa wametoa wapi. Ile pesa imelipwa ni bilioni 7. Na hiyo pesa bilioni 7 ambayo imelipwa haijapotea, kwa sababu tuko na mpango ya sawasawa.
Now, wale wanasema ilipotea. Who are those? We assume it is the DCI.
Yeah.
At that point, it was only
him.
It was only the DCI. Right. But then this is part of a trend, and I would like us to go to another bite with regard to Galana Kulalu. Let's listen to this. The DP again.
Our program on irrigation that we rolled out today, as the president says, Galana, which is our signature program, is going to be rolling out 30,000 bags from July, 30,000 bags every month. And we have not spent the 15 billion that is being discussed around. We have spent less than a third of that money.
I want to, even before I come to you, you comment on this Galana Kulalu, because it relates to what the statistics you are giving. Let's go to the Ministry of Health, 5 billion shillings that were lost at the time. Yeah.
Interim draft report ya audit wanakimbiza, wanapeleka kwa magazeti ati pesa bilioni 5 imepotea. Ni jambo gani ambayo hawa watu hawajajaribu kuweka fitina ati kuna ufisadi?
Then finally, NYS. I think we do have NYS as well. Yeah.
Ati mama anafanya hapa kwa saloon, aende register kampuni 20 siku moja, aende apatiwe kandarasi, alipwe million, karibu inafika billion. Really? Alafu mnatuambia, mnatembea hapo kuongea Kiingereza mingi ati unajua sasa imekuwa imeenda ikarudi. Hiyo ni maneno gani hiyo? Wacheni upuzi bana. Tuambieni ukweli. Pesa ya umma kama imepotea, tuseme pesa ya umma imepotea. Na wale ambao wanahusika wawajibike.
So some consistency in terms of placing himself right in the middle of scandals.
Yes, absolutely.
And normally denying first.
And being the chief denier.
Yes.
It didn't happen. If it did, it wasn't the same amount, and that was exactly what he did with Galana and the dam scandal. That, okay, there was a bit of money, it wasn't, as is being alleged, it's actually far less, you know, like the only 7 billion, and then there's a guarantee to it. And he has the benefit of making these very public denials, because we can't.
But there's a point here. I think that I have heard, if you listen to the Deputy President's supporters, they are saying something which perhaps is worth looking at. They are saying, hey, this so-called war on corruption appears to be targeting only the people who are associated with the Deputy President. That is it possible that there are people who are close to the President himself, people who are allied to him, who are also involved in all manner of things and are not being called out, and not being targeted by DCI? Is that a legitimate conversation?
Absolutely, it is. Yes. In fact, it's also impossible to separate the politics of corruption and the corruption of politics. We must look at them in two ways. This fight against corruption will definitely have a bearing in the upcoming general election in 2022, no doubt about it. And so, as the fight continues, so will the politics continue. Probably, maybe the Deputy President has a point. The fight against corruption should be across board. Fight it across the ministries. Fight it across the departments. And I've seen some figures, and maybe Jamila will look at them, indicating the number of people who have been taken to court, about 115 of them, and even categorizing them by tribe. But while that may be the case, there's also a need to look at some of the areas that the supporters of the Deputy President are saying, also look there. I mean, for example, when there was an issue about KQ story, and when you hear there are certain interests, it's also important to look there. When you hear there was corruption at the Afya House, the Ministry of Health, and some money was lost. In fact, some of the containers that were imported back then are still in Mombasa. It's also important to look at that corruption right there. And many other areas where corruption has existed. Because at the end of the day, those figures that you gave us, the net importer, all those stories, they affect each person, each Kenyan.
Individually,
and the problem
regardless,
is, while these politics continue,
it is your taxes, my taxes, and the viewers' taxes that will go into financing this corruption that we are talking about. Because most of these projects, bear in mind, are procured via debt.
Loans.
Loans.
Yes.
So even as the politics continue, just know that it is your tax that is also getting lost while that is
and yeah, I'd like to
just
yes.
weigh in on a few things that Francis is raising here. First of all, I think the Jubilee administration has subjected Kenyans to an unfair conversation, because basically they are saying, that is the Jubilee administration, here is the skunk divided into two.
Yep.
It's a very, very unfair conversation, because you find now Uhuru and William Ruto, both who came as one ticket in 2013, somehow trying to split blame when it comes to corruption cases. Now, in the way civilized states are run, a scandal in government is a scandal in government. It's not a scandal in a section of government. So there is no scandal that you would say, oh, this is owned by the allies of so and so, or the allies of the other side. There is no other side. This is one government. And I think what we should see is ownership of these scandals and a joint effort to actually resolve the same. Because right now what we've seen and been treated to for the last 2 weeks is a sharp divide between the president and the deputy president.
But what kind of conversation are happening in government, or ought to be? Because quite frankly, it baffles me when you see senior people in government speak the way they are doing, and they are basically one side rubbishing what the other side is doing, the other side going on as if nothing is happening, and yet they say, well, this is the same government we are.
I'd like to add on to, for just a second, what Linus was talking about. This is also a failure of their own making, in the sense that in 2013, they sold the bromance. Matching ties, folded, and it was, to some extent, to a great extent, this was a joint presidency. They, in fact, appointed people, so-and-so had his allies and the other had his allies, and they were put in there. And then now, both of them, this is detrimental. For one, a legacy. Will he leave behind a legacy of corruption? Another, will he inherit a legacy of corruption even as he seeks to become president then? And this is what it is. So you sold us the joint presidency, you involved us in your marriage, and then now it's, no, it's not me, it's them. But I also wanted to say, Francis, what you did mention is that it may seem, and without sort of casting aspersions, but there may not be anyone who has the moral authority over the other in government to say, you are more corrupt than the other. And I think that is what the deputy president is trying to say. Yes, there might be corruption, which he said, it's 7 and not 21 billion, but there really is a point to which, that sort of thing is happening.
But Jamila has
right
been
now.
talking about these dams and telling us how many there are. And I speak to people in the environment sector who actually say that this corruption thing kind of has a way of sustaining itself, even though someone said today that, I think it was Linus who was saying that now we
cannot afford
corruption. Corruption has become too expensive to finance.
But the larger point I was making is this, that there is that whole question of even whether we need the dams in the first place.
Yes.
Because there's been so much corruption, for example, in the destruction of forests, that if you speak to certain people, they'll tell you, if we didn't have so much corruption where forest officers and big people in government actually grab forest land and do other things with them, that we would actually not need those dams to have enough water flowing naturally from there. So corruption basically begins to have very many dimensions, that then we say, okay, we have done this one, let's now dig another dam, and then it doesn't work. So there's a sense in which this corruption thing is just that spiral that is not ending, and not conversation about whether we need the dams or not is not happening.
Because when you say about almost 60 dams in the country, I ask and worth almost 700 billion shillings, because when you look at the dams, there's one in Baringo, in Nakuru, in Wajir, in Kiambu there are two, there's Kericho, there's Kisumu, there's Nyandarua, there's Isiolo. Yes, some of these areas are actually dry, arid areas which would need these dams, because it should be a noble, the reason behind building the dam should be a noble one, that tutasaidia watu wapate maji. But now, because we are staying in the billions, and I was listening to you explain Yvonne, and I was shocked. I was thinking 1 billion, that's what it can do. For you to save to get to a billion, you have to save for over how many years?
274.
Exactly, and hundreds and billions are being stolen every day.
In the year 2293, sorry. I
Look
just
at
thought
that.
I'd put that.
Someone,
And
I worked out it can educate 4,000 kids from Form 1 to Form 4.
to Form 4, and it's being stolen on a daily basis. And something Francis said comes to mind, and he mentioned there's that list we were talking about. The list that I have has 115 people who've been arrested and taken to court. Of course, no one has been jailed yet, but they from NYS to NHIF to the judiciary to Kenya Pipeline. And the tribal breakdown is as this. Out of that whole list of 115, Embu, there are 2 people. Kikuyu had 43 suspects. The Luo were 18. The Luya were 11. The Kalenjin was 6, and the Kamba were also 6. The Mijikenda were 2, the Kisi were 5, and there was 1 Borana and a Sabawat. That's the list of the breakdown of 115.
You guys are doing badly.
So that brings me to
Clearly,
the whole
corruption
question of
is not an equal opportunity.
how corruption has become the headline every day in our newspapers. And this issue of the media and these reports on corruption has come up severally with several of these politicians, claiming that there is a lot of information being leaked from the office of the DCI, because corruption used to happen quietly. Things would happen behind the scenes, no one would know. But now,
quietly.
But now famous people are being questioned.
Right, Jamila, let me just attempt, Joe, to explain this link between corruption and ethnic suspects. It starts with the elections. Elections in this country are so hotly contested for the simple reason that, and you can hear a politician describing government as an animal that will be killed and meat shared. We hear them describing the government as a cake, bake a big one to be enough for everybody. Why elections are very hotly contested is because immediately after the elections, it's a winner takes it all, literally. Take it all, including the levers of the economy. It's about those dams, who gets the contracts. That is why all the contracts are actually reflecting who won the election, who is in government. You had the list, the ethnic list that was read here. It actually follows the voting patterns. And this is the reality of our country. And that's why people fight so hard at elections. Now, the other thing is, after the elections, these positions are then taken. URP were given some ministries to control, or some parastatals to control, and they put their people there without balancing regionally. So if you arrest the top 3, they'll be from the same region.
KVDA is an example.
KVDA, including the board, the entire board. If you went in there and said you are all suspects, it's 100% one region. It's because of how we appoint people also to positions. They no longer reflect the national map. They are just a reflection of who took the spoils during the elections.
Okay, Jamila, I think we should be flying in a different direction.
Yes, we need to be flying in a different direction. Good